Hello. Welcome to the COVID-19 teaching series, module number 3, Teaching for Impact and Engagement during COVID-19. Our learning intention for this module is, I am learning how to teach during the COVID-19 pandemic in blended and remote learning settings. The learning intention is followed by 3 success criteria that will let us know we've been successful in this if we can do these things. I can plan for synchronous and asynchronous learning within project-based and/or problem-based units of study. I can follow the gradual release of responsibility for both synchronous and asynchronous learning as I create the day-to-day plans for my students. I can plan day-to-day mini lessons to support and facilitate remote learning. So our essential question for this module is, how do I teach in a blended and remote learning setting to best engage and impact my learners? So you see our Bitmoji classroom, and you see on the board it says, today we will learn more about problem-based learning and project-based learning units. Well, these units of study for students during this time of blending and/or remote learning should be highly engaging and encourage deep thinking on the parts of students. One way to develop units that require deep thinking is to create problem-based or project-based units of study. Click on the lady in the chair in order to grow some background knowledge of problem-based units of study. This is a PDF out of Virginia that really goes into detail about problem-based units of study. Some highlights are, page 4 answers the question, what is this? What is problem-based learning? What is a problem-based learning unit of study? The basic components of this unit are found on page 7. Page 8 is how to develop one of these units. Page 9 is all the details about setting up the unit, instructions for drafting your problem question are found on page 12. A self-assessment for your unit that you create begins on page 14. There is a planning template on page 18 that we're actually going to use. And then there are some example units included at the end of this PDF. So if you click on the lady, and it takes her a time to come up, so I'm going to show you what will come up for you is this PDF, and it's how to develop a problem-based science unit. And I know this unit is a problem-based science unit, but the bones of how to do this will work on any unit that you see. So you see here your table of contents. You can flip through and decide what it is you need to know about these problem-based units. Here's how to develop one. Now let's scroll down here and I'll show you the planning template. Here's the planning template for one. Okay. So if you want to pause the video or the module and do some reading around problem-based units of study, what they are and how to develop them, that would be great. Just go ahead and pause. Just like when creating any units of study, even with problem-based or project-based units of study, we always use backwards design to plan. And this graphic reminds us of what this looks like. The fact that, first of all, we want to identify desired results, the big ideas and the skills we want kids to know and to learn. and then to determine acceptable evidence of that learning, and then to plan the learning experiences and the instruction that will get them there. Especially with remote learning, and so in a blending learning model, this is going to be very important. We need to create relevance in these units of study. We have to make this learning relevant to students in order to engage them. And so this slide simply defines relevance using these three criteria. And so I'm going to give you a moment and read this slide, and you can pause the module here and just have a conversation with your teammates on how you might go about doing this in a unit of study that you use face-to-face now. And again, we really want these units of study to be highly engaging, because we really want kids to engage in them face-to-face when they're in the classroom, and then carry that over into their remote learning also. And so we need to create conditions that foster engagement in these units. And so when we think of engagement, it has three dimensions. There's the behavioral engagement, which refers to observable academic actions that we as teachers can instantly recognize in students. There's cognitive engagement, which refers to the effort the students put forth to master this content. Students who seek a challenge, students who self-regulate during their own learning. And then there's emotional engagement, which refers to the affective, the feelings around the learning. Students engage in discussions, they create questions, they seek out help, they exhibit curiosity about the topic. All three types of engagement need to be present in a unit of study to truly engage learners face-to-face and then remotely also. So, to design successful blended learning experiences, keep this framework in mind as you plan and you create. I call it the 5 E's. First, we've got to engage. Think about all three of those aspects of engagement. What will ignite a passion and make my students want to learn this? Experience. How am I going to deliver this content in a way that makes sense to every student and truly gives them the opportunity to learn something from this experience? And then empower. What connections can be made beyond the walls of a classroom to help learners understand this? How do I help them make connections? And then enrichment, which is diving even deeper. How will learners that understand and master the content be given an opportunity to dive even deeper into it? And these will make some great remote learning possibilities. And then encouragement, that extra support. How will I support learners that need extra support in order to help them understand what is being learned? So remember the 5 E's, and that in our units, we must engage, give students experience, empower them, enrich them, and encourage them. So keep in mind what students need to be able to do in their learning. This is the process that students need to be able to follow to learn while at home and at school, both. It would be a good idea to teach this process early in the year in various ways to do each step during explicit instruction at the beginning of the year. So the process, I am learning to find information. And notice the I can statements, the success criteria under the learning intention. I am learning to use information. I am learning to create information, and I am learning to share information. This should create the backbone This process of learning that travels from the classroom to the remote learning at home. Students need to be involved in learning that makes them think. Avoid worksheets when at all possible. The remote learning of the blended learning experience should be an extension of that learning being done in class, not worksheets. And so think about that E for empower and that E for enrich when you're thinking about those 5 E's and designing the unit. Think about those as opportunities of authentic reading, writing, researching that students could do at home during the remote learning. A couple of tips or a few tips to keep in mind when creating these units of study. Select a few technology tools that meet the functions of the learning and those conditions of engagement. Design the task with engagement in the forefront of your mind. Whether the task is done synchronously or asynchronously, it should foster student learning. Remember that busy work turns minds off. Think project-based, problem-based. In a blending learning model, the classroom learning and the remote learning should be deeply connected. And then design a considerate schedule to promote student engagement, and we'll look at that in just a minute. 2 ways to connect classroom learning to remote learning are to create these project-based or problem-based units of study that begin at school and continue at home. And then also to set learning goals with our students and make sure that the learning goal follows them from their classroom work and learning to their home work and learning in the remote learning situation. And this table comes from Fisher and Frey and Hattie's new book, The Distance Learning Playbook. And it basically follows that process for learning that kids have to do in the first column, engagement opportunities in the second, and then sample technology tools that can meet those needs in the last. And so something to remember is not too many tools, but a few that meet the function of the task and increase student engagement. So what learning function does this tool fulfill? And can I use this learning tool for more than one thing in more than one way? Is this tool developmentally appropriate for my students to use with little or no adult assistance? These are just some good things to keep in mind as you are selecting the tools that you're going to use in remote learning. So what might this look like? In the primary grades, it could be a whole class read aloud of a Henry and Mudge book. And then the students in Henry and Mudge book clubs with other Henry and Mudge books. And maybe they're in social emotional learning research clubs as they read. And so maybe that problem-based or project-based learning question to drive that unit could be, what can we learn from Henry and Mudge about solving problems and apply to our own lives? They could keep a reading and a discussion journal. They could meet with the teacher on Zoom. They could meet with the teacher in the classroom. They can meet with each other via Zoom, Skype, whatever, breakout rooms in Zoom, to have these book club discussions, even remotely. For the upper elementary grades, what might this look like? There could be a whole class read aloud, I Survived 9/11 by Lauren Tarshis. Kids love the I Survived books, and they're historical fiction, so we're pulling in the social studies. Then you could have I Survived book clubs for kids. And then we could have historical content research clubs. And so a possible problem question for this problem-based unit might be, how can we as a society help prevent attacks like 9/11 from ever happening again? And then kids could keep a reading and a discussion journal. And again, they could meet and talk in class or via Zoom with each other in their book clubs. These are just two skeletons of possible project problem-based units, one for primary and one for upper elementary. So here we're back to designing the considerate schedule to promote student engagement. Some things we need to keep in mind. The time that we're in front of kids, whether it's synchronous learning or face-to-face, that time should be prioritized for connection, discussion, and interaction. And don't forget the importance of peer-to-peer interaction, even in blended and remote learning situations. Avoid Zoom fatigue. In other words, some learning should occur asynchronously. And then number 3, the schedule. Scheduled meeting times for remote learning should be considerate, they should be consistent, and they should be predictable. Here is an example of one possibility. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, or just Mondays and Wednesdays for those of you that are doing the 2 days and the 2 days. Whole group new instruction at 9 a.m., review and assessment. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 9, 10:30, 1, and 2:30, small group instruction. Mondays and Wednesdays, 10 to 12, 1 to 3, individualized check-ins and conferences. This allows the teacher to meet the needs of individual students by working with them one-on-one. Think about your kids with IEPs and think about your kids with outlying needs and conditions from the group. Fridays from 11 to 12 and 1 to 3, individualized check-ins and conferences. So this kind of schedule really does prioritize time for teachers to meet with kids one-on-one and in small groups. Something not reflected on this schedule, but would be a good consideration, is a time for parent support or office hours where a parent can jump on Zoom or can email you or whatever to ask questions about the learning so that they can better help support it at home. So we've learned about designing units that students can learn from both face-to-face and remotely. We've even looked at how a schedule might look across a week. Now let's start to focus in on the teaching day-to-day. This is an instructional framework for remote learning, and it does come from the Distance Learning Playbook by Fisher, Frey, and Hattie. Notice that purpose for learning is in the middle of this learning windmill. Students need to know their purpose for learning. Then you see demonstrating. Students need teacher demonstrations and explanations. And then they need time to collaborate. They need time to collaborate with the teacher in a small group setting. They also need time to collaborate with each other. Think about breakout rooms in Zoom. They would work well for this. And then practicing. Kids need time to practice in the presence of the teacher, and with coaching from the teacher, so that when they go out and practice independently, they are practicing it right and not practicing it wrong. So finally, students need time to practice authentic reading, writing, and thinking by extending their learning into their remote learning time. Notice how this looks very much representative of gradual release of responsibility. It begins with teacher modeling and works through guided practice, collaboration with the teacher and with each other, all the way to independent practice. Independent practice would be what the students are doing remotely at home. And remember, it should be connected to the classroom work, that unit that they're working on in school. And so if you have to send home packets for students who may not have internet access or access to a device, those packets should not be full of worksheets practicing skills in isolation. They should be the resources that those kids need to do the same work that other kids are doing digitally. So the daily mini lesson structure in face-to-face and then remote learning. So face-to-face, we all know the 4 parts of the mini lesson: the connection, the teaching, the active engagement, and the link. Well, in remote learning, it's even shorter and it's more direct. So you have tell, teach, try. And in the tell, you tell students what they're learning today, why they're learning it, and how they will know they've been successful in learning it. And then you teach them how to do something. Usually I end my teaching point with watch me, because that's a reminder to me that I'm going to show them how to do something. And then for try, this is guided practice. They try it in the presence of the teacher so the teacher can see that they understand and know how to do it so that they can continue that learning independently, remotely. So here are some additional possibilities for engaging in learning during problem-based and or project-based learning. One thing to think about here is how intervention will be handled in a family model. A possibility for this, grade levels could have a set aside time every day for intervention/book clubs. And instead of the interventionist pushing in or pulling out, she could meet with the students she meets with in small group via Zoom. That way the kids wouldn't even have to come from the same classroom. And she could teach them virtually while the students remained in their classrooms and she remained in her classroom or her office. Another idea could be to have digital centers for students to work on while the teacher works with a small group in the classroom. Now, a note of caution here. Time with the teacher should be prioritized in the blended model. So the teacher would need to make time to push into all the centers to see how kids are progressing. Click on the MTSS layered triangle for additional ideas for intervention in synchronous learning situations, even if that synchronous learning is occurring in the school. So I'm going to click on this. And I'm going to go to the shared reading small group. And you see my virtual classroom, you see my learning intention and my success criteria. I can read the cat smoothly and with expression. And then you see there's a poem here about a cat that we're going to practice during shared reading today. And there are other small group rooms in there for you to look at. Some additional resources, especially when you're developing the small group intervention groups or just the small groups, out of the University of Florida, they have a hub for virtual teaching. And so both of these links are to resources in that hub. There are digital Elkonin boxes. There are other digital resources to help kids with phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, shared reading, you name it. So what we want you to do right now is to try this out. Using the template found at the link below. Work with your grade level teacher team and sketch out a problem or project-based unit of study that students could work on face-to-face when they're at school and during remote learning at home. Remember these things. The classroom work should be connected to the remote work always. Worksheets are not best practice for face-to-face learning nor remote learning. Students needing packets for remote learning need the packets to include the materials they need to be able to participate in these units, not worksheets. So copy and paste this link into your browser, download the template to help you as you begin planning your project and or your problem-based unit of study. The resources used in creating this module were the Distance Learning Playbook and the Teacher Clarity Playbook, plus the other resources that you have live links to within the module. Thank you so much for all that you're doing for our kids, and good luck on this journey to creating the best face-to-face, virtual, and or blended model of learning for our students in South Carolina. Thank you so much for what you do every day.